Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to be diving into something that I know a lot of you have to deal with, and it's not always the easiest thing in the world. And that is criticism as an autistic adult. We're looking at this blog post called Adult Autism and Criticism to Respond or Not to Respond. That is the
Mm.
um and we're hoping to be able to help you navigate this really kind of tricky territory.
It is definitely a sensitive topic,
Yeah.
but we're hoping to give you some information
Mhm.
and different ways of thinking about it rather than like a one-size-fits-all.
Right, because there are so many layers to this. So,
Right.
I'm curious, what do you see as kind of like the core dilemma that the blog post highlights?
Well, it boils down to a real tension, like responding to criticism.
Mm-hmm.
You can be valuable.
Mm-hmm.
You can clear up misunderstandings. You can educate others. Sometimes it can lead to positive change, but,
Yeah.
and it's a big but, it can be emotionally draining, sometimes even to the point of being detrimental to well-being.
Yeah. That tension is so real. It's like you want to engage and explain your perspective, but it's like walking through a minefield.
Yeah. And that's where I think some of the specific challenges that autistic adults might face come in. Many autistic individuals interpret language very literally. So, understanding the subtle nuances of criticism
Mm-hmm.
can be extra difficult. And there's the emotional intensity. That can make responding feel monumental.
Oh, totally. It's like it's not just the words themselves, it's that whole social and emotional weight that comes with it. So, how do we even begin to like unpack that?
Well, one thing that comes up a lot, and the blog post kind of tackles this head on, is the question of silence.
Mm.
What are the consequences of not responding?
Right. That's something I think a lot of people struggle with. Does not responding mean you're avoiding responsibility or ignoring valid feedback?
It's a valid concern, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where understanding the autistic experience is so crucial. For many autistic individuals, silence isn't about being dismissive. It's about taking time to process, taking time to regulate their emotions, and to prioritize self-preservation over immediate engagement.
So recognizing your own needs in that moment, rather than jumping into a potentially overwhelming situation.
Exactly. And that ties into what the blog post author calls radical self-care. And they're not talking about bubble baths and face masks. This is about a deeper commitment to well-being.
This is where it gets really interesting. What might that radical self-care look like specifically when you're dealing with criticism?
Well, it could be something as simple as stepping away from social media after receiving a critical comment. Even taking a 10-minute walk before you even think about responding can really help to regulate your emotions. It might also mean setting very firm boundaries with people who are consistently criticizing you in a hurtful or invalidating way.
And sometimes that self-care might just look like reaching out to someone you trust, someone who gets it, just to process those feelings.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing when you need support and having those resources in place. And remembering, self-care is not selfish, it's essential.
I love that reframing. It's about building that resilience, building that inner strength to kind of face those challenging situations.
Exactly. And when we talk about support, the blog post also touches on the power of the autistic community.
Yeah. The author actually talked about their own experience with receiving criticism online. Even as a writer and an advocate, it's such an important reminder that you're not alone in this.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Finding your tribe, finding those people who get it, who've been there, can be so validating. It's
Yeah.
about exchanging coping strategies,
Yeah.
offering support, and just knowing that you're not alone in those feelings.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are some specific ways that the autistic community can offer support, especially when it comes to dealing with that sping of criticism?
I mean, it can take so many forms, online forums and support groups, even just a few close friends who understand. Finding those spaces where you can be yourself, share your struggles, and celebrate your wins without judgment.
It's like that feeling of finally being seen and heard.
Right.
And that ties back into what we're talking about here, this self-advocacy.
Exactly. Recognizing your own needs and boundaries and finding ways to communicate them, even when it's tough. And sometimes that means choosing to engage. Sometimes it means stepping away to protect yourself.
Right. Because you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to prioritize yourself. The blog post also brought up something that I think is particularly tricky, and that is figuring out the intent behind the criticism.
Yeah, that's where those social nuances can be so confusing. Tone of voice, facial expressions, even the context. It all impacts how criticism is received and interpreted. And for autistic individuals who may process information more literally, those nuances can be even harder to decipher.
And I imagine it's even more challenging online when you're missing a lot of those visual and auditory cues.
Absolutely. It's like
Yeah.
trying to read a book with half the pages missing.
Right. And sometimes it's like those backhanded compliments or that constructive criticism that feels anything but. How do you even navigate that?
It's tricky. Trusting your gut is key. If something feels off, it probably is. Learning to tune into your own internal radar. Recognizing those red flags. So important.
So it's about self-awareness, but also about giving yourself permission to question things. Like if you're unsure about the intent, is it okay to just ask for clarification?
Absolutely. Simply asking, can you help me understand what you mean by that?
Mm.
Can really shift the interaction from defensiveness to curiosity. It opens up a dialogue
Yeah.
and can lead to a much more productive conversation.
Even if the criticism isn't delivered in the most sensitive way, I imagine there can still be valuable takeaways. So it's about finding that balance between protecting yourself and being open to growth, right?
Exactly. About filtering everything through your own lens of experience and values. What resonates with you? What can you let go of?
And that all ties back into that self-awareness that we talked about earlier. The more you understand your own needs and your own triggers and strengths, the better equipped you'll be to kind of handle it.
It's like building emotional armor so that you can face those challenging interactions without feeling completely overwhelmed. But remember, this armor isn't about shutting down or closing yourself off. It's about creating a protective barrier that allows you to engage authentically and safely.
It's about finding that sweet spot between being open to feedback and setting boundaries to protect yourself, which I imagine is a process, not a destination.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes time. It takes practice. And it's okay to make mistakes along the way. What matters is that you're learning and you're growing and you're becoming more confident in your ability to handle whatever comes your way.
That's a really encouraging way to look at it. And let's be real, dealing with criticism is tough for anyone, but especially for autistic adults who might be navigating sensory overload or social anxiety, all sorts of other challenges that can make those interactions even more stressful.
Exactly. That's why having those coping mechanisms in place is so crucial, whether it's deep breathing exercises or mindfulness practices, even just calling a trusted friend to vent.
Sometimes you just need to let it all out, and having those supportive people in your corner can make all the difference. But I think it's important to remember that support isn't just about leaning on others when things get tough. It's also about celebrating those wins and acknowledging how far you've come. It's so important. It's easy to get caught up in the challenges, but taking the time to celebrate your strengths and your resilience is crucial. You know, autistic adults bring so much to the table. Unique perspectives, incredible creativity, passion, loyalty.
It's about recognizing that autism isn't a deficit, it's a difference. And that difference can be a source of amazing strength and resilience. It's about embracing neurodiversity, not just tolerating it.
Exactly. And that's a message we need to amplify within the autistic community and beyond. Because the more we can normalize these conversations and celebrate neurodiversity, the more inclusive and accepting our world will become.
I couldn't agree more. And ultimately, that's what this whole deep dive is about, helping create a world where autistic adults feel seen and heard and valued for who they are, and where they have the tools to navigate criticism in a way that feels empowering, not debilitating.
Because everyone deserves to feel safe and respected, regardless of neurotype. And that's a great segue into our final takeaway for this episode.
Yes. Let's wrap things up with some food for thought for our listener. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to leave everyone with something tangible that they can take away and apply to their own lives.
So thinking beyond individual coping mechanisms, how can we create a more supportive environment for autistic individuals, both online and in person, to navigate criticism constructively?
That's the million-dollar question. It starts with education, learning about autism and neurodiversity, being mindful of the language we use and the assumptions we make, creating those safe spaces where people feel comfortable expressing themselves without fear of judgment.
Recognizing that everyone communicates differently. What might seem like a harmless comment to one person could be deeply hurtful to another.
And choosing kindness and compassion, even when we don't fully understand someone's experience.
It's about remembering that we all have something to learn from each other. It really is. It's like, we're all just trying to figure out how to do this thing called life, and a little understanding can go a long way.
Absolutely. So to our listener out there, if you are dealing with this, just know that you're not alone. There are people who care about you, and they want to support you.
And remember, you are strong and you are capable and you have a voice. Don't be afraid to use it. But also, if you need a moment to step away and process and recharge, that's okay too. Self-care is so essential.
Couldn't agree more. And as we kind of wrap up, I want to add like one more layer to this whole conversation about criticism.
Mm.
We've talked a lot about responding to criticism from others, but what about the criticism that we direct at ourselves?
Oh, that's such a good point. I think it can be so easy to fall into that trap of self-criticism. Like we are often our own harshest critics.
Exactly. And this ties back to what we were saying earlier about
Hmm.
self-compassion and radical self-acceptance.
Hmm.
How can we extend that same grace and understanding to ourselves that we would offer a friend?
It's a practice for sure, but one that's so worth cultivating. Because when we can be kinder to ourselves, I think that creates so much space for growth and healing.
Makes all the difference.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. We hope this has given you some food for thought and maybe even some tools to help you navigate those complexities of criticism.
Remember, you are worthy, you are valued, and you are not alone.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.